long-term drought. And that can aid you in just seeing where we're at for the year, what's our departure from normal. Maybe a little bit too full of numbers there for you, but that's at least some tool you can use. And then once we know what the issue is, I really want to focus on what happens in the plant. Okay, we've removed water from this situation. How does your plant respond? How does your plant respond going into heat stress? What does it do, and what can we do to kind of help affect it positively or help it through these situations or these stressors that it's going through? I will spend a little bit of time on variety selection. All that is we're just going to discuss the importance of starting with the right tools. You want to have the right genetic tools so that your grass is capable of surviving rough situations like this. And we'll talk briefly about that. And then probably the most important part will be management. I really think us getting together and managing how we fertilize, how we irrigate, how we mow, all those things have an effect on how hardy your grass will be when it comes to a drought situation. And so it's important that we go over there and that we're utilizing all those things properly so that we're not sitting there running short of or doing something that may be causing a further problem on the drought just by what we're doing. So moving on from there, we'll have a quick review. But let's look at this drought monitor map. What all this is for is so that you can see the impression that right there in the center you can see those dark grays and blues. This is not a Kansas problem. This is a large regional problem of both short and long-term drought situations. As you can look all the way through that center there, that's a large area that's under exceptional drought. Not just extreme, not just it's pretty dry. It's a really hard situation. And when you're that short of water, it becomes a pretty vital resource, especially for your lawn, that you're going to have to manage. If we look a little closer, let's just look at Kansas, for example. If you're from the Shawnee County area, you can probably pick yours right out of that corner there. We're looking at 100% of Kansas in a severe drought. Okay, so you have to kind of accept that as of January 22nd, that's where we're at. 100% of us in a severe drought, 79% of us in the next stage up exceptional drought, or extreme drought, I should say. And then from there, over a third of Kansas and what they call an exceptional drought, which is a very rare occurrence to be this short of water. And so when we go to manage that, this is just to give you an understanding that your expectations of perfection may have to play seat to Mother Nature here. That you're surviving the situation and doing the best you can with the tools you have. This is a large thing to overcome. So I just want you to fully understand what it is to be in a drought. And what it means, a short-term drought defines a growing season. So we may not have got as much rain in the spring, and maybe that's going to affect our crops, or in a short-term situation, we're in a deficit of water. A long-term is several months to several years. So we are both encountering a short-term and long-term drought situation. So both in the short-term and the long-term, we're running pretty low. And, probably the biggest question I would have is drought just a measure of rainfall. Are we just looking at whether I'm short of rain? And it isn't just rainfall. That's the easiest one for us to identify with, easiest one for us to measure, but that's not the whole story of drought, especially in the long-term sense. In short-term, pretty much is a measure of rainfall. But we also look at temperature. We look at evapotranspiration. That's the combination of how much water is evaporated from the plant and how much is consumed in transpiration when they're making food. So they also consider that. They also consider soil runoff and soil recharge. Now, most of those are fairly complicated procedures, but the idea is that if it's hot, more water evaporates, which means it's a more severe situation than if it's cool. Right now we're not evaporating away a lot of water because it's cool outside. But in the heat of the summer, you're losing a lot of water quickly. And so that's where these other factors come in when they're considered in the long term to define it as a severe drought or an exceptional drought, that sort of thing. So this is 2012, our precipitation for the state of Kansas the entire year. So you may look at that map. Green is not good in this situation. Green would be light, just like when you see the red. But you can see us down here in this, mostly in this light green range, where we received about 20 inches of rainfall in the year of 2012 around our Topeka area. So That's just giving you kind of an understanding of the total amount we got this year. And this is a map showing the departure from normal. So if we're looking up here, these reds and these severe situations that you're looking at right in there, that is over a foot short in water. So 12 inches of water, you know, you hear a number like that, and that's hard to define. You know, you can't really grasp how much is that short. And so we've determined we're in a long-term and short-term drought. So what if we were 2 inches short? Last year, 2011, we were 2 inches short of rainfall departure from normal. According to these will be round numbers, so we can kind of move this along a little bit. But an inch on 1,000 square feet is 623 gallons of water. If we double that, we want to know 2 inches. That's about 1,246 gallons of water per 1,000 square feet just on your lawn. So for average yard is about a 1/4 acre. If you're 2 inches short of water, that's 15,000 gallons short just on that 1,000 square feet. That's 2 inches. We're a foot. Okay? So if you look at it, let's just use a little bit more math. If we're 6 inches down, okay, that's 45,000 gallons on an average yard that we're receiving less than we're used to. Okay, so that's a tough situation for the yard. If you want to look at that in an acre set, let's say you have an acre yard, that's 163,000 less gallons on an acre. That's 6 inches down. We're 12 inches down. Okay, so if we're looking at that, let's just say the 6 inches down, and you had a garden hose at 40 pounds per square inch, and we decide to go ahead and just kick on that garden hose, and we're trying to water an acre of ground. Okay. If we ran that as 163,000 gallons we're short, we can put 384 gallons an hour down with that garden hose. And if we ran that for 24/7, that's 17 days of running a garden hose full blast on an acre, and you're only halfway to how far off we are. So, you know, you sit there and you think, oh, I water, oh, I go out there and kick on the... But we're talking about more than a month of watering 24/7 to get caught back up, and that's just not practical. I mean, you know, that's what I'm trying to do with this. I don't want to scare you all out of your room and you all hide and go put some water in the fridge or something. What I'm trying to do is just show you that water is a precious resource, and when we don't have it, it really impacts the quality of turf we have, and those little stresses that may not be an issue at all in a big year can really come to fruition when we have a short year like this. So if we're in our total 12 inches down, and we're more than 12 inches, but let's just say we're 12 inches, we're talking about 326,000 gallons of water per acre short. That is a lot of water to be short for. That's 90,000 gallons on your average yard. Not there. So we have to, all that water is very difficult, if not impossible, to replace. Don't try to replace it. It's not possible to replace it. What we have to do is look at the requirements of the turf and try and manage it as best we can so that we have adequate quality and that it's surviving. We can't replace it. There's just no way to. And what that will do is understanding how these plants cope with it. That should help us make better decisions as we go forward. A lot of ponds looking like that right now. Lots of space between the shoreline and that. So these good management practices will help us when it comes to making your yard survive. So what does drought stress look like in your yard? You sit there and you go, okay, drought stress. Well, obviously it's wet, so what does that mean to me, Chad? When you're looking at a yard, as you look at this one over here, here's an example of a yard that I believe that's probably been irrigated. You've got this lighter green over here, and then as you get to this corner, there's almost a purple color. As that water leaves the plant, all those cells kind of pack together a little bit, and they create a darker look to the turf. So initially, your first symptom of drought stress is actually darker turf. So you'll see a darker, chalky appearance that defines my plant is suffering from some drought stress. Some wilting is taking place. Okay, and that's easy. We've all spotted that. I see that in my yard often. So if you've been around the last few years. Next stage, you may see it just a little bit of browning. Nothing too bad. Just it starts to be more of a permanent look You know, you've seen some of the leaves die. It's not something that, you know, we water this and it goes right back to that. It becomes a little bit more permanent where it doesn't look there. And then the third kind of stage is you start to thin out. You know, you physically start to lose sections of the turf as it thins out during drought stress. So it's important to be able to identify that symptom. So when you walk out and you see a spot in your yard and you say, oh, you know, it's a little chalky, it's a little purpley, a little dark color, I know that it's experiencing drought stress. So what does that mean? Now this should, you know, high school biology, don't freak you out here. I'm just going to go over it. So I think it's easy if we go right to the root of the problem so that we understand what it is. So in the short term, how your plants, for lack of a better term, make food is they open cells underneath the leaf and they allow gas to exchange. And where they make their food, that's where the oxygen goes out and the carbon dioxide goes in, and they manufacture food by that process, and that's the transpiration. That's that number we were talking about where water is consumed. Okay? So when it's doing that, all this gas is being exchanged in this part right here, and the plant is losing water rapidly. It's also cooling itself while it does this. And these cells right here are the gatekeepers. When they are full of water, you see that little storage organ right there, this vacuole. When it's full of water, the cells are open, allowing this gas exchange to take place, cooling the plant, making food, doing all these productive processes. When it's short of water, or it decides through the stress to shut that, then we're no longer exchanging any gases, we are no longer cooling the plant, and we are no longer producing any food. So its first stress of water is shut those guard cells and stop producing food. So that's the first thing it does, and initially it also stops the cooling process of the plant, so it makes it a little more vulnerable to heat stress. The other thing grass does is this technique called bulliform. The only way to really describe it is if you've seen corns, probably the easiest one to see. You have these nice big straight leaves and they look like this, and then all of a sudden they'll roll up. You know, you'll see that they'll roll up to reduce the surface area to keep that water from being lost, okay? So when the grass does that, that's how it's responding to this stress of being under drought. It wants to protect the water that it has left by not bleeding it out while it's making food, and by not increasing the surface area. It wants to bring this all down so we're not causing any problem, we're not losing excess water. But what the side effect of this response is photosynthesis stops, plant growth halts. We're in a tough situation now. We're no longer making food to survive, we're using our storage. So that's important that you know that once it gets hot, no more food is made, you are dealing with what you have stored. So if you don't have much stored, you're in trouble. If you've got some storage, that's a different situation. In a long term, we get into that wilt, and the wilt will turn to desiccation, which means the leaves dry out, they get crispy. Then they just say, I'm pulling everything to the storage organs of the plant, meaning I'm abandoning the leaves and I'm pulling everything to the crown, and this is when it goes into that dormancy period that you'll see in the summertime. So it's in that, when it goes down to the crown, which is the storage organ in grass, you know, we can get there, we can survive just within the crown for about 6 to 8 weeks. That's pretty common for it to be able to survive that. Now, you've got two options from there. Water comes and you survive and move on. Water does not come, that crown desiccates and the plant dies. So that's kind of how drought stress broken down there for you. Now, heat stress is a separate stress than drought stress. They are not the same. They are related, but they are not the same. So heat has this nice little table here where it says what it is, but essentially if it's too hot, the plant cannot produce food again. You have the same sort of deal. All the productive processes stop, and any time the temperature is over 86 degrees, your plant is, for lack of a better term, can begin to cook, okay? And once it starts to cook, then all your productive processes not only stop, but they start to degrade. You're actually starting to, physically, the cells will start to die, that sort of thing. So what we want to do, you know, in this heat stress situation, I forgot to mention, let's just say in Kansas, you all have been out here, and you know the summers when it gets all hot, and then it gets humid hot, you know, you really feel that difference. Your plant feels that difference as well, because when you're out there and you're sweating and it's not evaporating off your skin, it's not evaporating off that plant either, and that plant is feeling the heat in a much more severe situation when it is wet and humid, and not necessarily wet down there, but the air is humid, than it would if it's dry. You know, so do keep that into consideration. And prolonged exposure, you know, when it just many days over this, if you can think of an egg in a frying pan, you go out there and you cook that protein that the egg is, never looks the same again. You cooked it. You know, that can happen to your roots. So some considerations in heat that can contribute to this. If we're under drought stress, there is no water for transpiration. If there's no transpiration, we're not cooling the plant. So the drought compounds the heat problems. So it's not just that it's hot, it's that it's hot and dry. That becomes a more significant problem than if it was just hot or it was just dry. Okay, so they do work off of one each other. And why it's in this stress situation, your plants are more vulnerable to damage. So you know that 4th of July party where the yard was nice and crispy and you drove out there and you did that, you may notice that come September, those wheel tracks and those sorts of things, even in the winter. So when it is, it's more vulnerable to physical damage when it's under these stresses. One thing that people don't think about is that water transfers heat faster than air. So if you have watered or saturated your soil and that soil begins to heat up, that is a very dangerous situation. Because the best way to explain it is you can stick your hand in a 500-degree oven and pull it out and be okay, but you can't stick your hand in 500-degree oil and expect any kind of survival out of it. That heat is transferred to that tissue and cooks much faster when it's wet than when it's dry. So sometimes, you know, people who water at the wrong time of day or maybe really dumping it out there in the afternoon, and that heat of the afternoon sun starts to warm up that water, you can compound the problem with cooking your root system than the other. And soil temp is way worse to be high than air temp. Your air temperature can be pretty darn hot, but watch those soil temps because that's really where the damage will take place. Because if that crown cooks, your plant is done. So you just have to be concerned with that. So there is a little trick that I like to use on our test plots out of Premier. I've got some little plots that I take care of. And I use, try to take care of them with the least water I can. But on those days where it's over 100 degrees, I use a technique called syringing. And you may see this at golf courses and those sorts of things. You're looking out there at a golf course and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What on earth is he doing watering? You know, but he's not watering long. He's just turning on the system, spraying down the surface of the leaf, and then that leaf evaporates. That water evaporates off that leaf and cools your plant temporarily. So, you know, in Kansas, we may have several days where it's above this, but if you have a 3-day stretch where it's 114, you can save your grass by just spraying it down 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon real quick. Let that evaporation cool it, and instead of that felt temperature being 114 degrees, that felt temperature is maybe 90 or 80, you know, while that evaporation is taking place. The thing to be careful, if you put too much water down, and it doesn't just evaporate off the leaves, you heat it up and you cook it. So you cannot overdo it. And this does not count towards your irrigation total. This is a quick spray down. But sometimes that's a little technique you can use to get by the 114 degree days. Now once it's experienced this stress and your plant says, I'm done with it, I'm going to survival mode, we have this period of dormancy. So this is looks maybe dormant Bermuda grass, but for our example, you know what dormancy looks like. And some people will mistake this with death. There is dormancy before there is death. So once you see the dormancy begin, you have a 6 to 8 week period of which this plant is alive and fine. Where most people make the mistake and say, I lost it, and they cut off the resources right away. No water, no effort towards it, no anything, and they kill it. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when it does enter dormancy, and there's some tall fescue that's gone dormant, we've all seen this, little green stripes and then some dark stripes out there. It can occur when those temperatures are consistently above 90 degrees or below 50. But basically it's a biological response to unfavorable conditions, and we're just trying to conserve resources. So your grass just pulls it all in, puts it in the storage organ, and is sitting there. And that's okay. People fear dormancy, embrace dormancy. Dormancy is a good thing because when your plant is dormant, it is not consuming resources that it can't replace anyway because it's too hot. Okay? So when it's that's probably the simplest way to do it. So we're pulled back into the crown. And for our area, I would try for dormancy in that July time frame. So I would, as a manager, I would want my grass to go dormant in that July time frame and plan on waking it up in August. And this is the part a lot of people forget. They see their grass go dormant and it's hands off. I see the grass go dormant and I plan for when I'm going to wake it up within this 6 to 8 week period. So for me, July, I reduce the amount of water, not all at once, but I reduce the amount of water and I allow this dormancy to take place, and then I come back and I am waking it up on August 15th, knowing that the favorable temperatures are right around the corner. It takes a couple weeks for it to respond to get out of dormancy. We're in September 1, cool temperatures are back, and your grass will come out aggressive, green, and nice looking out of dormancy, versus a lawn that you push the entire summer, not able to make food, not being able to produce resources, burning up all its reserves. A dormant yard will come out and look better that first part of September than one that's been pushed through the whole summer. Now, that doesn't mean that in certain situations we want to maintain that quality up there, and I'll show you how to do that in the irrigation section. But for us who want survival, that's the best way to do it. Allow it to go dormant, wake it back up, plan on that day. So some of the tips: don't suddenly stop watering. If you've been watering 3-4 days a week, the next week is not 0, the next week is 2 days, the next week is not 0, the next week is a day. You wean it off slowly so the plant can harden off. Sudden changes kill turf. Whether that's a whole bunch of fertilizer and none, or it hasn't been fertilized and then you try to, sudden changes are what kill turf. So be careful when you do that. So like we were talking about, do not scalp or remove the top during dormancy. This is not a benefit. Go ahead and leave it up. Leave it 3-4 inches. That's fine. The more buffer you have, the more surface area you have to evaporate if you do, your little spray down technique, or we get a little rain. And you really want to avoid fertilizer and herbicide when it's in its dormant period. If you do, you're forcing the plant to respond to something at which a time when you want it to be asleep. So if you fertilize it and it's dormant like that, it's saying, okay, I've got a message to try and wake up, what do I do? And you'll force it to kind of wake up and use resources when you don't want it to. The second thing is herbicide. For lack of a better term, most of our herbicides are growth hormones. So they are hormones that are ubiquitous in the plant, and we just throw the level out of balance a little bit. Okay? These hormones are making things grow. Now they make your grass grow too, but it doesn't kill it. And that's kind of the difference between broadleafs and other grasses. But by spraying that hormone on the plant, it perks it up and makes it want to start growing. Not a good idea when you're trying to deal with dormancy. Now, all those tools we talked about are great. Some are better than others at handling it. Here's a little picture of our test plots out at Premier. This is what I maintain using kind of these lower water or lower resource type methods. And these varieties, all I really want to get across here is that K31 is still slightly more drought tolerant than our turf types. But the window and the gap between those is greatly closed over the last few years. So K31 is very good at doing two things: growing vertically and growing down. So that deep root system helps it out. The turf types, they have the potential to be dark and green, under the same fertility, dark and green, so your quality is much higher with those. Also, they do spend a little of their resources growing laterally, so you have a much denser stand of turf. But just be aware that if it comes down to just flat out survival, I honestly, yes, K31 is a little bit more drought tolerant, but if you have any quality expectations, a turf type tall fescue still is the grass that I'd recommend for our area if quality is important to you. How I come about that, they have a national, I call it a nationally funded beauty contest for turf. They have all these varieties and they put them out there, and all these places throughout the United States, they'll test them, they'll see which one's pretty at different times of year, okay? Pretty helps, if it looks pretty, we would consider that to have good quality, right? But that doesn't tell the whole story. There are some things like persistence that we really want? You know, will that grass be there the next year? Will it hang on through tough times? And it may not look as pretty doing it. So the biggest thing I want to get across is make sure wherever you're buying your seed, someone's thinking about this. And they're not just, I've got stores from Minnesota to Florida and I put the same grass seed in the whole place. That's not a good deal, because what grows well a little bit north of us or a little bit south of us may not do so well in our area. So we want to make sure that someone's at least considering that. And K-State is a wonderful resource for that. They have recommended varieties, lists that they put out that contain these varieties that are doing good and have proven to be persistent. And that's the big thing, that we've got somebody who's thinking about it, somebody who's picking it. Another thing is, you know, an industry professional or an extension agent, not a lot of seedsmen around here that can, you know, go and tell, but those are the people who I deal with when we go out and select our varieties for Kansas. So make sure somebody is focusing on Kansas, because this is one of the hardest places to grow grass. And you may think, oh yeah, he's just saying that. No, really. I mean, the transition zone is the toughest place to grow grass. We have to be better managers than they do in Nebraska, where they can just sit there and put some bluegrass down and it rains all the time and it never gets too hot. You know, too hot to them is 85 degrees, you know. Too hot down here is 100 something. So it's easier as you go north of the transition zone or you go south of the transition zone. All of a sudden Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, all these other grasses become something you can use. But in the transition zone, both types of grasses grow here, neither one well. So, you know, we have to sit here and be managers where everywhere else it's pretty easy. You know, they just kind of throw it out there and they're like, see, that's not so hard. I don't know what you guys whine about. But around here, it really requires some education and some persistence to deal with the conditions we get thrown at. Because I mean, it just varies so widely. It gets so cold and so hot here, it's really tough to grow grass. In management, irrigation is still the most important skill, in my opinion, to master. And it starts with knowing what you're putting down. If you're not measuring how much water you're applying, you're watering blind. And you don't know if that's a good thing, if I'm overwatering, if I'm underwatering, if I'm guessing, if I'm doing it too often. You just don't know. And when we're talking about maybe facing water restrictions in the future, I would ask that we all know. You know, we want to know what we're putting down so that we're not overusing or underusing that water. And a survey was done in the Wichita area that found that the average homeowner with an irrigation system overwaters their lawn by about 70% to maintain the optimal quality. So we're talking about folks with irrigation systems. That's not all of you in here, but some of you in here water too much. And the way they evaluate that is they sent out surveys and they ran that and they cross-checked that with how much they should be using. The other thing they found out, the same survey, is those folks without irrigation systems, their expectations are here, they are watering here. So they, you know, folks without them are underwatering significantly based on their expectations. That may not mean, don't take anything by that, it's just what the data show. So how much water does your lawn need? Now they'll have very rough estimates that they'll put out there and say, well, to maintain quality, put down 1 inch a week. Okay, if it's really hot, put down 1.5 inches. That doesn't really tell you what it needed that week or what it needs right now. It gives you a good estimate, and that is what it is, an estimate. Okay, it may require more than that or it may require less than that, but that's an estimate. And one other thing with irrigation, that you can save a lot of time sometimes just by watering the dry spots. You know, when you see that spot up there, you're putting plenty of water for the rest of the yard, just take a garden hose and dump it right in the area where you have a problem, instead of watering the whole system, you know, wetting the whole thing again, or, you know, just to fix that one area. There's nothing wrong with just dumping water right on the spot where you've got problems. So do remember, spot watering can help save a little water too. But if you want to save more water, base it on the ET value. And we talked about that term, evapotranspiration. Okay, this will be a little bit technical within the presentation, but if you bear with me, it gives you actual numbers that you can use to get done what you need to get done. So evaporation, or ET is what I call it, is the evaporation of water plus the transpiration that those plants consume, and they total that in a number called ET, evapotranspiration. They found that there is no difference if you replace 100% of what your plant used or if you only replace 60%. So that's our big first cutoff. We can drop from 100% replacement to 60% and to maintain exactly the same quality. Okay? Now, root expansion and health can go at 20%, and I'll explain this ET thing here, just bear with me a little bit longer. At 20% ET, root expansion, growth, and health is maintained. So this is 20% of what the plant is shown to have lost. Okay? And you're saying, well, how does that all get to me? So, an irrigation system, they found that most of this, they did a similar study in Florida where they actually had controllers that measured the ET for the area, did all that, and they found that it was way too complicated for homeowners to use. They would just, yeah, I don't get it. I don't want to do it. So the simplest thing for you folks with irrigation systems, if you want to save money on water, is I'd recommend getting a soil moisture sensor. And all that is you'll dig down within the soil, you'll put it in a dry area of the yard, there's a sensor that sits in there. If there's adequate moisture, it gives a no signal. No water today. Okay? And then, so when your thing's sitting there, I'm going to water 3 times a week regardless. First it checks with that soil moisture sensor to say, am I a go or no go today? Okay? So that can save you quite a bit of water just by that soil moisture sensor. For those of us who don't, there are some other ways we can do it. This little website right here, this is a public information website, the Weather Data Library for Agronomy at Kansas State. Up in this corner, you'll see in Shawnee County there are 2 sites to which they register daily data for evapotranspiration free of charge. You can just hop on that site, look at it, it tells you just right there, what did your lawn lose? It'll tell you right there. So for me, I like to use the Silver Lake weather station. So you would just click on the Silver Lake weather station and it'll tell you day by day what your grass is losing, what the soil temps are. You know, all this information that we want to know is just readily available right there for public information. Okay. One thing, when you sit there and you're using this ET data, is I would use your local rainfall as a guide. So what rains in Silver Lake may not be raining where you're at. So please keep that in mind as you go. So again, we're going to subtract your local rainfall, not Silver Lake's rainfall. So that's the only point I want to make when we're getting into this nice little table that's out there. So if you do that and you set the parameters, I just cut and pasted, this is the chart that came up. Okay? So I cut and pasted it, and you'll see this ET in grass right here. Okay? And it's really, really scientific how they measure ET. I don't know if you know this, but they take a PVC pipe that is filled with turf and grass and sealed at the bottom, and they place it in the yard, and they weigh it in the morning and night and how much water is gone. So it's really not that complicated of a deal, but it gives you a number that you're working with. And having a goal is the most important thing when you go with irrigation. You have a goal that you're trying to replace. You're not just doing it to do it. Okay? So we look this ET in grass up, we total this amount here. So it's a 0.21 inches, 0.27 inches, just like that for 7 days. We have a total ET, and then we have a total precipitation. Now you would use your local data, okay? But I'm going to use their data. So it says right here, looks like we got a little 1/4 inch rain right there, and that was about it. Maybe another one right around there. But that counts towards what you would irrigate if it wasn't provided for you, okay? Just last week I was meeting with a superintendent that runs Culver Hills. I know if you know that golf course out in Manhattan. And he has a calculator within his reach that he tells the members how much, he puts a dollar sign on what a rain costs. So he comes up there and he said, hey, we got that 3/4 inch rain. He goes, that was to the members, you know, what that saved them in irrigation was $6,000. So, you know, these numbers are big on golf courses, but they apply to you too. And he's using this data, same sort of data set. Now they have their own weather station right there, but this is how the pros use it. Okay, so here we are. The ET in grass for 9/7, that little week right there, the total amount that it showed that you lost was 1.1 inches. Okay, so we lost 1.1 inches. We recorded 0.26 inches in rainfall. Now I would use your value, whatever it is at home. So your true loss was 1.1 inches minus the 0.26, so there's 80.84. That's what your lawn realistically lost that week. Now we only have to replace 60% of that number. Remember, there's no difference in quality between 100% and 60%. So that's a 1/2 inch of water to be replaced. So if we consider if we consider that in your formula here, so if the normal recommendation is 1 inch a week no matter what, right? But we only needed a 1/2 inch, you can save about 3,000 gallons on a 12,000 square foot yard just by using that data. 3,700 gallons in 1 irrigation week savings is not bad, okay? So you really can use this to narrow it down. Now in reality, I understand that this is maybe taking it way to the extreme, but at least if you understand that it is possible to see what your yard needs and it is possible to replace exactly what it needs. So you don't have to do the whole deal, okay? And that's really the main point with that, is that it is possible with free information to go through and figure out how much water your needs, either to maintain quality, to keep roots going, or to keep it alive. You have that option to look through. Now, as we move on from irrigation, okay? So management, the other thing we do is we mow our yards, okay? That's the one single stress that we do to our yards that we don't really ask of any other plant, that hey, everything you grow, I'm going to mow you off every week. That's a tough thing to ask a grass plant to do. So when we're mowing, height does matter. A 3.5 inch lawn has a much higher chance of survival through drought conditions than a 2-inch lawn. Okay, why is that? That extra 1.5 inches that we've got right there, that plant makes food with that 1.5 inches. Fertilizer is not food. No matter what people tell you, no matter what they say, food is made by light, sunlight. The more sunlight you can produce with it, the more food you can store with it, the longer you can last through tough times. It's just real simple. It's a numbers game. Okay? So if you mulch and you don't bag, what that does is that increases the organic matter content in your soil and creates drainage channels and stuff through the thatch. And it also provides a little layer of insulation between the soil and the elements. So that soil temperature that we're talking about, that can go both ways. If you have saturated thatch that heats up, hey, you're going to cook it. But if you have thatch that's dry and the soil is wet underneath and it's drained away, we get to capture more of the water that's applied to the lawn and less of it rolls right off into the into the ditch or wherever it may go. So just understand that it does provide a positive benefit to mulch, not bag. Now, too much too much mulch can lead to excessive thatch. Now, when we have that problem, that's a whole nother world. And that can be a severe problem. Tall fescue lawns, for the most part, don't have a problem unless you're overwatering or over-fertilizing. If you're doing one of those two things, yeah, you're going to have a thatch problem, and it's going to come back and bite you when we get into a hot summer sometime. And I've gone out to guys' yards, and they've got 2 inches of thatch and can't figure out why nothing will germinate, and why did my whole yard die? Well, all the roots were sitting there in the thatch, none of it in the soil, and as soon as that dried out, whole thing gone. So, moving on from mowing, fertilization is also important. Okay, it's all about the root system and it's all about food. If you increase if you are fertilizing your yard, you are increasing the demand for nitrogen because you are producing more food. So if you need more food, you need more water, you need more transpiration to produce the food. So the timing is really the important thing then. Do I want to increase that demand when I can't make any food? No, probably not. We don't want to fertilize going into a stressful situation. Do I want to do that in the fall? Yeah, we really want to do it in the fall. That's when we can produce food and store food, not burn food and use food when you can't replace it. Okay? So excessive or poorly timed applications can deplete carbohydrate reserve. All that means is if you stored reserves in the fall and you go and put that fertilizer down in the spring, let's just say here next week I've decided I'm going to go out and I'm going to fertilize my yard. I want to have the greenest yard on the block tomorrow. It's going to happen. You go out and do that, that plant is forced to grow. And it grows quickly, and you mow it off. And it grows quickly, and you mow it off. And it's green until it's proceeded to burn through all its reserves that it's stored all fall long. So then you are sitting here with a deficit of carbohydrates moving into the most stressful time. If you leave it alone, I guarantee you, every yard's green in the spring. Your neighbor who does nothing, his yard is green in the spring. The hormones in the plant are geared to go ahead and produce this nice looking green shoot growth early in the spring, okay? So, yeah, that nitrogen on the fertilizer bag, first one. The other thing you don't think about is when you fertilize with nitrogen, that plant has to grow faster than normal. Okay, when it grows faster than normal, the cuticle thickness, that's that layer that's on the outside, that kind of waxy coating, okay, that holds water in the plant. Now if it's thinner, all of a sudden you got a problem. Your evaporation is higher on a plant that has a thinner cuticle. So that water escapes from the plant fast. And if you don't know, don't guess with fertilizer amounts. Okay, I got a lot of people that have had to come out and look at their yard and they can't figure out what's wrong with it, and they are grossly over applying or grossly under applying fertilizer. If you don't know, just ask. And professionals should be able to go out and help you get the right amount, get the settings proper, so that you're applying the right amount. You're not overdoing it or underdoing it grossly. Because one thing that you need to know, in situations like this, your margin for error diminishes significantly in a drought. Okay? And when things are dry, when things are hot, the little mistakes you may have made and that rain covered your tracks, they are exposed like none other right now. Okay? Any little mistake you make is just right out there now. It'll kill it. So we don't have that benefit of this wonderful insulation of rain that covers all our mistakes we make as managers. Okay? It's showing you right there what it is. So if you don't know, don't guess. One other thing, potassium is extremely important to the plant in stressful times. A lot of people forget about potassium, but it is the pump. It is how that, when you looked at those stomates and those vacuoles were open and shut, potassium runs those pumps that allow this plant to do it. It allows it to bullet form. It allows it to do these techniques to reduce the water lost. So if your plant has plenty of potassium, it is able to manage the stressful situations much more effectively than one that is short on potassium. So this is, in the lawn, becomes a way to help to help use every little bit of water you got. This is how you do it. Okay? So again, the only time I would not allow potassium is if your soil test says it's high. If it, most Kansas soils have adequate levels, and I don't mind putting a little bit more if it says adequate, but if it's excessive, do not go to excess, because it will end up tying up some other nutrient and causing you problems later on. So just be aware of that. I mean, that's a little departure from normal, but during stressful times, potassium is important. Okay, now when it comes to weeds, they compete with water. They compete for water, they compete for sunlight, they compete for fertility. They're a competitor to your yard. But too many times, people look at them and say, oh, well, that's my problem. Weeds made my yard this way. Okay, weeds are a symptom, they are not your problem. Okay, so the best defense against weeds, sorry about that, your best defense against weeds is a healthy standing turf. So if you're following these fundamentals of management, watering properly, things are going well, this doesn't become an issue. Now it can become a little bit of an issue in dormant turf, because especially if you're watering dormant turf, because the warm season weeds like crabgrass and all that sort of stuff love it. Hey, you're giving me water and it's hot. I love hot, and it grows. Okay, but your cool season lawn doesn't like it. So maybe spot spray is okay, but just not a blanket application. Okay. So again, weeds are a symptom, not the disease, and fertilization reduces weeds, especially fall fertilization. Okay. When you fertilize in the fall, your grass becomes thicker. If your grass is thicker, there's no sunlight for the weeds, so they do not have a way to compete with that turf grass that's nice, established, in place. That's why we use it. Turf in and of itself is an excellent weed. I mean, it is in itself an aggressive grower, can grow thick, can tolerate mowing, can do all sorts of things that we ask it to do that weeds can't do. But if it's bare soil there, somebody's got to be there, and the weeds are going to take advantage of it. But just know that it's not your neighbor who doesn't do anything causing your problem. It's your management practices. Okay? So just be aware of that. And again, when they're vulnerable, just be careful with herbicides so that you're not overdoing it and causing stress to your current lawn. Okay? So again, quick review. Remember, drought is a force of nature. Okay? You may do everything I say and have problems. Okay? It is a force of nature that we're dealing with. What I'm trying to do is just give you some tools to give you a little bit of a push in your favor. Okay, that's all I'm doing. Okay? Drought does compound heat problems in the lawn. So a droughty lawn causes you more problems. You just have to be aware of that. Okay? So when we don't have the water to cool the plant, heat becomes an issue. Okay? And management, I think, is still the key to surviving the drought. If you understand what you're doing and how what you're doing affects your grass, you're in a much better position than a person who is just guessing. I think I ought to do this, I've seen him do it, I better do it. But you're not really thinking about what you're doing, okay? And again, if I have one thing to say about, in all the years of turf grass school and all that kind of thing, it's the roots, it's the roots, it's the roots. Anything I can do to have better root system, the top takes care of itself. It is just an illustration of how well the roots are doing. Okay, that is the main thing that helps grass be what it is. So remember, have a plan in regard to irrigation, fertilize in the fall. Dormancy is acceptable. I call it acceptable. At that point in time, when we're in a drought, as long as you're planning for it, you ain't out there when it's 114 anyway. You're not using your yard then. But in the fall, you want to have that quality, so dormancy is acceptable. Don't mow too short, keep an eye on the thatch, and just understand how your actions affect the lawn. And I don't know where I am on time. Looks like we got about 5 or 10 minutes. So if we're able to take some questions this time, go ahead.
I have a lawn with about an inch of topsoil and a heavy clay plastic soil underneath that. Any special techniques?
The question was, I have a